Hello, everyone. This is Thomas A. Mitchell. I am back with the next installment of my Confessions of an Avoidant. This is part four, and today I'll be talking about when I was younger. I did speak about it a little bit in part one, but I didn't really go into detail. And what I'll be talking about today is when I was younger, my relationship with my parents, my mother, and my father, how I believe I ended up being a fearful avoidant. And I'm going to explain in detail who they were. I won't go so deep because I do have siblings and I don't want any issues for them. Um, Let me talk about my mother. If you watch my other videos, I think it was part two where I talked about how my mother was a narcissist and she was bipolar, and how my father was very distant. Now that I've done my research in attachment styles and became a relationship coach myself, I realized that my father was also an avoidant. It seemed like he, just as much as I can remember, seemed like he was more of a dismissive avoidant. Um, so yeah. All right, I'm gonna start off with my mother. Tell you a little bit about who she was, some of the things that happened when I was younger, and this is just based on some of the things that were who created who I was, which basically means some of the things she did to me and how I ended up. I feel like I said a fearful avoidant. Whew, oh, this is gonna be deep for me. Um, my parents have both passed away. Yeah, so just to talk about them and to bring them back up is kind of like a little emotional for me. Um, so anyway, my mother, she wasn't a diagnosed narcissist, but once again, remember I told you that I went to school for had a minor in psychology. Um, I realized today that she actually was a full blown narcissist, and she was more of a covert narcissist, and she was also bipolar. And later on in my life, I found out also that I had some bipolar tendencies as well. Um, so anyway, my mother, as could recall, when I really start to realize who she was, I remember my mother always being controlling. I remember my mother always seemed like she was always angry. Sometimes she would be really happy, and then other times she would just be angry, and she would just take it out on everybody. I remember my mother saying that she was always right to me and my siblings, and as long as she was our mother, she was always going to be right. Which later on in my life, when I became a teenager, almost an adult, I used to get offended by it and eventually called her out on it. But when I was younger, my mother would, like I said, she actually did come to a lot of my football games when I was younger. She actually came to all of them, and she would be very affectionate at times, but then she would be very off at times. She would like get angry for some of the craziest stuff, and I didn't understand it then. I didn't realize that she was actually bipolar because I'm like a young kid. I'm not thinking about stuff like that. But my mother, when I was younger, I felt like she had a God complex. Like she was perfect. She was always right. She would never apologize about anything she ever did. Which, as I got into my teenage years, I used to get angry about it. Um, and actually, I felt in a weird way disrespected because we kind of grew up as Jehovah's Witnesses. And she was a Jehovah's Witness, and the fact that she would think that she was always right and never wrong, and that the fact that she continued on saying that as long as she was our mother, that she was always going to be that way, and the fact that she could never apologize for nothing she did. I mean, my mother, in early on my late teenage years, she did some terrible stuff to me, and I'm gonna get into that in a little bit. Um, yeah, that really bothered me. But when I was young, I just thought my mother was just angry with her siblings. She was just angry with her mom. She was angry with my dad. It seemed like she was always angry with everybody. Um, and I didn't get it, and I didn't know how to deal with her. It always felt like I was walking on eggshells with my mother as a little kid. And I don't think that's just not the way for a kid to come up with their parents, walking on eggshells, not knowing how they're going to be from one moment to the next. And that's how I felt my whole life dealing with my mother. And as I got older, I had to remove myself completely um, from around her. I could no longer be in her environment. I remember one time I can recall that me and my brother got into an argument, which was probably the only argument me and my brother ever got into. And we were young adults. And my mother literally, I had done nothing. I hadn't put my hands on my brother. I didn't put my hands on anybody. My mother literally called the police on me, had me arrested for nothing. So the police picked me up, took me to jail for battery. And I was in jail for like 2 weeks before I had a court date. And when I had my court date, she was there. The judge, who was an uh, older white judge, that part doesn't really matter, but he was. And this is at the time. This was in Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. And when we went to court, the judge was telling me all this stuff and what I was being accused of and how did I plead. And I basically said I pleaded not guilty. And I think they wanted me to plead no contest or guilty, but I wouldn't because I know I hadn't done anything. And then I remember the judge speaking to my mom, and my mother literally, I couldn't believe she did this. She literally admitted to the judge that she had me thrown in jail. I hadn't done any of that stuff. And she literally had me thrown in jail because she wanted me to listen to her and that she was the boss. And the judge, he couldn't believe it. Like, he couldn't believe that she, first off, actually said that. And that that was something that a mother would do to her son. And the judge is like, Mrs. Such Such, I can actually hold you in contempt uh, for, falsified information. And then the judge looked at me. I think that's what he said. And the judge looked at me and he says, um, young man, I really apologize for having you arrested. And, oh, I remember the judge also saying that he was actually going to put my mother in jail for that. And he turned to me and he asked me, he says, young man, what do you think? Do you want me to have your mother arrested for what she did and what she did to you? And I thought about it. I really thought about that. And I was like, first off, the whole time I was in holding, I was angry the whole time because I was like, how could my own mom, create all these lies about me just because she wanted control? I couldn't believe it. And I thought about it for a second and I said, no, Judge, I don't want to do that. I don't want to press any charges against my mom. That's just who my mom is. And to be honest, everything I was saying to the judge, that's who my mom is. I truly believe that's just who she was. She always wanted to be in control. And so he let her off with a warning. I went on about my way. And and believe it or not, this whole me being thrown in jail was because I wanted to be with my girlfriend at the time, and I didn't want to, have anything to do with being around my mother. So it was like she wanted to have control over me, and she felt like she was losing control over me because I was now with my girlfriend at the time. I went on about my way, and do you know I didn't talk to my mother for 2 years? And do you think I felt bad? I'll be honest with you. I didn't feel anything. I didn't. I was numb to everything. And at the time, I didn't realize that was dealing with trauma and had some personal issues myself. I ended up with a control issue myself, and just being with my mother. I was like, oh man, because she always had to have control. It taught me that, like, I want to take my control back. But not only did I take control back in my life, whenever I got involved with someone, I would seize control over them, which usually ended up me not having a long term relationship with most of them were pretty short. The longest relationship I've had was when I dated a narcissist, and she did her thing, I did my thing. That was like 11 years. I think I spoke about that in the other video. Um, in Yeah, I developed this whole control thing too, because for the first time in my life, I had control of my whole life, but I went overboard with it. So I went from distancing my mother, which was the avoidant part of me, to doing the same thing in my own relationships. The very moment that I no longer felt like I was in control in my relationships. And sometimes I just like, hey, you're not doing what I want you to do, I'm out. And I would just bounce. If I felt like everything wasn't following the pattern that I had created in my mind, if that person wasn't doing what I wanted them to do, I would leave them. I would create some, I would just create an argument or have an excuse in my head that I had planned to use against them, and I would break up with them. And you think I felt bad about it? At the time, no, I didn't. But I would say after a month, maybe 2 months, I would start thinking about them. I didn't feel bad. I just started thinking about them like, oh man, especially if I wasn't with someone else. Usually I would be trying to find someone else, because this was when I was much younger. And it's a lot easier when I was younger. It was a lot easier for me to just like find somebody else, you know. As I became an older guy, that kind of changed a little bit, but it has always been easy for me to find a relationship, because I was one of the type of people that I was very much an extrovert, very charming. I feel like I'm pretty good looking, got my money right, everything. But back then I didn't have my money right, but I was very charming, very good looking. That's when I had my hair and stuff. So not that's important, because I don't even like hair anymore. But I it was always easy for me to go into another relationship that didn't work out, and then I would bounce. I'm gonna tell you, every relationship I ever was in, I broke up. I broke up with everybody. It wasn't one person I didn't break up with. There was no woman that I never didn't break up with. And the reason I broke up with them is when they wasn't doing what I wanted them to do, and they wasn't following my orders, I left. I bounced. And eventually I found myself, I started to stop dating single women, and then I would start dating married women. So I started dating married women when I was way younger. I remember when I was like 25, I dated a woman who was 52 years old, and she was married. And I was like, well, she's married, I don't care. I think that's when it really started. Like, oh, this is most comfortable for me when I started dating married women. Oh, this is really comfortable, because I don't have to hold myself accountable for anything that I do, and she has to keep it a secret because she don't want no problems in her marriage. So that felt really easy. And when things went sideways, when she wasn't doing what I wanted her to do, boom, I was gone. I was out, and I didn't feel bad, not even a little bit. And it was usually the married women I'd like. I never kind of really looked back because I never had any feelings for them. For me, it was just a physical thing. I never emotionally attached myself to them at all. I was like, okay, we're moving on this. Let's get after it. I would get after it, have my fun. Hopefully, they had their fun. Trust me, they did. And I would just move on. Whew, man, this is a lot coming off my chest. This actually is like therapy for me to tell you all this. Um, so that's, I don't want to get too in depth about my mom, but that was one scenario that she did that just, that was one of the worst things to me that she did. And for 2 years, I didn't talk to my mom, didn't think about her. I didn't think about her at all. And that's my mom, someone that, I loved her, but I even made a statement to my therapist. I said to my therapist one time at the time, I said, you know what? That's my mom. I love her because I'm supposed to love her. But I would never be her friend. And if I didn't know her, I would never like her. Like, isn't that crazy? But she had done so many things. I'm only telling you one thing. But she had done a lot of things to me. I can't tell you. I can recall one time when my mother was on her deathbed. And this is how clueless she was about who she was. She was on her deathbed, and I didn't see my mother for over 10 years. And my mother was like on her deathbed, and I remember walking in um, to the hospital room to see her, and I hadn't saw her in 10 years. And my brother lived with her his whole life. They cohabitated his whole life. My brother went so far as to say my mother was his best friend. And do you know this is how this type of person she was? I walked into the room, and when I walked into the room, my mother said in front of my brother, "Oh, there's my favorite son." And she was talking about me in front of my brother who did everything for her his whole life. And I looked over at my brother and I didn't say anything to him. And maybe if he watches this video, he'll know how I felt. But I felt so bad for him inside. Now, I never said that to him. So if he watches this video right now, he'll know that, man, I felt really bad that she would say something like that. But I hope he doesn't watch this video because I don't want him to be triggered by this. Um, yeah, I felt bad. But I never told him that. I just like, oh, okay. Oh, I know what I said to her. I said, Mom, well, Jimmy's your favorite son too. Um, mm, yeah, I'm using a fake name, so that's not my brother's real name. But that's what I said. And and she was clueless. That's how much she only cared about herself. Even on her deathbed, it was all about her and her feelings. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and move away from my mother because it's pissing me off. My father. My father was an avoidant. My father was one of these men who never hugged you. My father never came to one of my football games ever. And my father was a football coach. He never came to one of my games. So what ended up happening to me, which turned me into this fearful avoidant, my mother turned me into the avoidant side, and my father turned me into this anxious side. I was always trying to please my dad, always trying to make him come see my games and be the best that I could be. I just wanted to be the best. And no matter what I did, I just wanted to be the best. My whole life, I was trying to impress my father. My whole life. I just wanted to be the best. End up becoming, my father had passed away, but I was pretty much, when I was younger, I wasn't like an A student, but as I got older, I just became just like BA student. But when it came to those sports, because my father was an athlete, he was a coach, I did everything to make him proud. And he never came to one of my games. He never mentioned my games. I remember my mother like telling him one time that, how good I did, and he just kind of blew it off. And I was like, damn, he really don't care about me, you know? And so yeah, man. Anyway, I'm sorry I got lost train of thought because I started thinking about my father on that level. Um, I remember my father. I mean, be straight up honest with you. My father didn't even tell me he loved me until he was 1 year from death, and he was starting to, take ill. I remember we were sitting out on the porch, and I on his porch, and I remember he said to me, "Son, I never told you I love you, but I do." And when he said that, most people would break down and tears and maybe hug their father and stuff like that. But I felt numb. I didn't feel anything for him. I mean, I loved him because he was my dad, but all I could think about was like, man, why didn't you say that when I was younger? Why you never came to my football games? Why you never came to my track meets? Um, why did you never hug me? All that just went to my head when he said that. It was like he could have said that. And what I wanted to say to him was like, man, old man, you could say that because I don't really care. That's what I wanted to tell him. But I didn't say that. I just said, oh, okay, Dad. You know, I didn't tell him I loved him back because by that time, it was too late for that. And, yeah. And I think because of that dynamic, I know because of that dynamic, I just became the person I became. I was always, I've always been an outgoing person, but I've always been, I would avoid people at all costs. If there was people who I felt were very clingy, I wouldn't be around them. Sometimes even today, that like, even though I'm secure now, I can still feel that energy. If like there's somebody just overly clingy, I do still get uncomfortable because I'm still working on being secure. You know, um, yeah. And I just wanted to share this with you about my youth, how I grew up with the parents that I grew up with, and how I became this fearful avoidant. Not everybody's going to have the same story, but this was my story. And the things that I did, I always, anyone that ever got too close to me, first I would be really anxious at times. I would, like, in the beginning of the relationship, sometimes I wouldn't really love bomb people, but I was always a giver. I would be just like, I guess that's kind of love bombing, right? I would just give things, because I wanted them to like me, you know? The women in my life. I would just buy them all kind of fancy stuff. But the very moment that they started to get too close, I was out. And I would start a fight with them to break up with them, or I'll just tell them straight out, hey, this ain't working out. Especially with the married women, I'd be like, look, you need to like try to work that out with your husband. I would always use that same line. Maybe you need to try to figure this out with your husband, and see if you can work it out, because this ain't working out. And I always would use that line. Anyway, this is Thomas Aaron Mitchell. I own XBack Solutions. You can find me on Instagram under XBack Solutions. You can find me on right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to my page, by the way, because it really helps the algorithm. You can find me on Facebook and TikTok.